Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So, with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter.
Hi everyone, my name is Tawny Loveless. I am a love and confidence coach. I help people get clarity, confidence, and the closure they deserve. I am going to be reading a letter from an anonymous gentleman today, and let's get started. All right. Hi, team. Thanks for taking the time to read my letter. Let my story be a lesson to others. We were together for over 5 years. I met her at work 7 years ago, and she was magnetic. We had instant chemistry. I loved how she was smart, strong, and independent. Over a 2 year period, we became close friends. We discussed our dead marriages, and she complained endlessly about her useless husband. It was a running joke between us. We both planned a divorce when our kids are older. The potential between us was unspoken and obvious. I didn't mind that she had I didn't mind that she had many short relationships that she all ended and was to be divorced for the second time in her 30s. She said she loved the idea of living separately from her partner going forward, but I figured it was because of her bad experience with her then husband. She said she needs a lot of alone time, and I'm quite introverted myself. It seemed like the perfect match. I'm going to stop here, and I'll probably do this throughout the reading to give some feedback, some insight. Um, this is where I'm getting a taste of some avoidance. Possibly she is an avoidant. You mentioned, when they continue to have short relationships and they all end the same, it's kind of like healthy versus red flag. Because, wouldn't it be so bad if they were short relationships and so forth? That's not, like dating a lot isn't the issue or having, these short relationships, but ending them all, like she ended all of them. And, she is only in her 30s at this time. And was to be divorced for the second. So this is the second time she's getting divorced. I mean, prior to that, in the first marriage or in between, however that works, there were all these short marriages that she ended. So that's the red flag I'm gathering. And for those of you, that's a question. That's an area we want to like stop and think about. Like when someone has always been the one to end the relationship, that's questionable, and you should be asking why, because why are they ending all their relationships? All right, moving on. I was switching jobs, saying goodbye to our daily lunches and walks, and at my goodbye party, we both got drunk. When we said our byes, she passionately kissed me, and I fell madly in love. We met often after that, and the sex was out of this world. I had never been pursued that hard, nor by such an attractive woman, and I found it deeply flattering. We spent a lot of time together on Friday nights and days when we worked from home. We each thought we had found our soulmates. She wasn't good with emotions and communicating them, but I figured this is her Slavic background and she just needed a healthy example. So, especially because this is an affair going on, what crosses my mind is trauma bonding. You guys were both talking about dead marriages and so forth. So that's what I'm seeing right here, or like what's standing out to me. Also, when there's a lot of chemistry and intensity, and an affair adds to that as well, the intensity and chemistry. But when there's chemistry and intensity like this, we often bypass red flags. We often bypass incompatibilities. Our spouses suspected we had an affair. I hurt my ex wife and regret this a lot, not just for her, but for the unrest at home for our children. I should have handled that with far more respect and maturity. I started a divorce first after having an affair for 2 years and moved near to her, an hour away from my children, and saw them every other weekend. She divorced second, and she said she didn't trust her ex husband and she'd take all the child care on herself. She also said she didn't want me near her kid for some time to get used to the new situation. I understood, but I was mad as I had committed to the relationship quite hard, sacrificed for it, and this meant there would be much time for us. She convinced me, oh, let me back up. She also said she didn't want me near her kid for some time to get used to the new situation. I understood, but I was mad as I had committed to the relationship quite hard, sacrificed for it, and this meant there wouldn't be much time for us. She convinced me that it would work because we had never been able to see each other much. Already, it seems like. We both were happy and proud to finally be together. So here, I'm wondering if okay, at this point, and this letter prior to just the whole letter reading, they had asked, if we could specify or we could kind of share where we thought we might be getting, what kind of taste of an attachment style they might have. I shared earlier that it seems like she might be coming off avoidant, and I'm gathering that he may have an anxious attachment style at this point. The other thing is, when I hear this is kind of like that first control move for an avoidant, where they're starting to be like, this is the first sign of like intimacy on their terms, like okay, I don't want you seeing my child, and I get that because it's a new situation and she's trying to be, empathetic for that reason. And I get that. But again, like, he had committed, he had made so many sacrifices on his end. So he's kind of feeling like, all right, well, now she's calling the shots, right? Like, all right, so it's the first control move, like the intimacy on her terms. And I also feel like this is also a way for like avoidance, like the typical avoidant, to maintain like that emotional distance. So yeah, I can see where, wondering where this is going. We started working together to have more time for each other. We were actually good at resolving small conflicts because I was doing almost all of the emotional labor. I felt butterflies for the first 3 whole years of being with her. Over time, our closeness faded, despite my best efforts. We didn't hold hands anymore, but she hooked her hand in my elbow. Greetings and goodbyes became short. We talked less and it became more one sided, with me carrying the conversations. I couldn't read her inner world anymore as easily. We sometimes got into arguments that had the issue of quality time underneath. I felt the distance increasing and often asked her about the situation with her kid. If we had more time together, we could restore the relationship and feel close again. She gave me non committal updates that sounded like a solution would come soon, but it never did. She continued to be loving and affectionate when she was there, but a lot of distance was built into our relationship by default, and it was all on her terms. So it already, like, to me it sounds like here's where the pulling away starts, right? This is where they start backing up. Like, first it was the control and kind of controlling that narrative, and although there was good reasoning, which is why a lot of times we can stay in these relationships, because it does make sense. Like, she did just come out of a marriage, a second marriage, this is another divorce. Like, we don't want to rush, introducing the kids. So like, there's these moments where things make sense and we justify a lot of the things that are going on that will later cause a disturbance within the relationship, right? An imbalance. This is also often, speaking of power imbalance, this is often where we see kind of like that avoidant, anxious trap. Um, and I would say, a lot of times they can be physically present, but they're not always emotionally available. They're just not tapped in. They're not connected to the relationship. They're there, but they're not connected like you are. Um, and I would say all of this pulling away is really like, this is like when you start to see the real deactivation. Like, this is where it's all beginning, where they're starting to really pull away, and you're starting to feel, you're starting to feel it now. I feel for you during this because you've made, like you said, you've made a lot of choices that maybe you don't feel good about, but at this point you're investing and putting your all in. Um, and you mentioned it became very one sided, and it sounds one sided a lot throughout this. Um, Moving on. Okay. I realized something was off that made things more difficult than they had to be. I assumed it was difficult circumstances as she kept me away from her kid. She had seen my kids many times, and this wasn't a big deal at all, despite them being younger than hers. I never understood what was so special about her kid that he couldn't tolerate another loving adult in his life. I felt anxious sometimes in the relationship with the distance despite her repeated assurance of love. It's those moments there too. I was just going to say, it's those moments too where you start to go, well, I just don't think that's fair, right? And we still kind of allow it. We just kind of roll with the punches, and in the back of our mind, we're still thinking about it. But like, it's important to be validated. Like you were thinking correctly. Like you had, like without that understanding, and she's not offering an understanding. You like so many times in these relationships and these letters, there's always like that moment where they say something shifted, something was off, and that's kind of like when we start to see the downward spiral and how this all like ends up coming to be, I guess you could say. um but and you said she's giving you repeated assurances of love, but again, like the verbal is not matching up with the other stuff, like the words and the actions are not aligning. So you are right to believe that something's off, and you're dealing with probably at this point, I'm pretty sure it sounds like she's an avoidant, somewhat of an, or has somewhat avoidant tendencies. So she's not going to offer any explanation. She's going to keep that, avoidance kind of like gatekeep. They're not going to like, they don't allow you in all the way, whether that's, you're not going to meet all of their family, or maybe there's just different scenarios. But I would say this is one of them, keeping her kid away. In our fourth year, I had a severe burnout. She was there for me in the beginning, but the effort soon faded as she said work got busy and she began chasing a promotion. I spent months looking at the ceiling and crying in her absence. I almost begged her to be there more, to move in temporarily, but when she refused, I was too mentally weak to do anything about it. I took what I could get. Dates always felt rushed, and she never spent a full evening, weekend, or slept over. We spent around 4 to 8 hours a week in total, and I often felt both lonely and anxious, but I figured that these feelings were mostly related to the burnout. When I asked to see her more, she gave me the same reasons I always believed: work, kid, appointments. As I physically recovered and could come to her place for a cup of coffee twice a week, she said she didn't enjoy that because she's busy and she didn't want me to come over anymore. This hurt incredibly. Again, we see that deactivation, and it's not just the beginning now. Now we're seeing it in like full swing, right? Like now it's like she doesn't even want you there for coffee. You've mentioned that she said she's busy twice. I mean, busy for me when it comes to avoidance is I can't handle any emotional demands because it's during like, I feel like crisis. A lot of times it's during like a crisis moment. Like it sounds like you're having a crisis here, right? And you needed her, and she was present in the beginning, but then everything kind of faded and she refused, a lot of things, and dates felt rushed, and you weren't spending a lot of time together, and she always had the same reasons, which again, work, kid, appointments, it all sounds legit. So we kind of like go back and forth with, is this really legit? Is it not legit? I mean, they are good reasons, but then you have in your head like, people who would just do, if they could, they do. So again, like the busy thing, I just feel like a lot of these have that same thing. They start to become busy. Now they're in total deactivation. She's already said this is like the slow fade to like, this is part of the slow fade, right? Like everything's starting to fade. And we saw it happen, a while back. So that slow fade does take I mean, they'd probably speed it up if they could. But it seems like the slow fade is pretty slow right before they cut you off. So again, during like crisis moments, or when you need them emotionally, or when you need them to show up, this is kind of like when you tend to see them pull back because it's that emotional demand. We require them to show up, and those are moments where they're going to probably have to feel things or discuss things and not avoid things, and they're not going to be present for that. And if they are, they're not going to be emotionally available. So moving on. Despite what you might expect, my feelings for her only grew and grew in this time. I was miserable and anxious without her, and felt great when she was there by contrast. Those little glimpses of intimacy became the highlight of my week. I was happy as a puppy when she rang the doorbell. I thought about her all the time, and I spent much of my idle days looking at her photos and rereading her texts. When I recovered enough to return to work, I was genuinely happy to spend more time with her again, and so was she. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bridge the distance between us. And that distance and anxiety had started to feel like a normal part of the relationship. I confused a lot of the anxiety for butterflies and love, and there was a lot of it. When I returned to work, she refused to spend time with me there, to take a short walk, or sometimes even take breaks with me. When I fully recovered from burnout, I opened the conversation with her. I said I felt neglected and abandoned when I got sick. She said she was there for me the whole time. She asked dismissively what I'm even talking about, and the conversation went nowhere. I opened the conversation again another time, and she said she knew those words and cut the conversation off. I then felt very alone in the relationship and started to resent her. I pushed for my needs to be met. I visited her for those daily coffees. I began to ask and even demand more quality time that she gave begrudgingly. I was so confused about what was going on at this time and fought for the closeness that I thought the relationship needed. I believed her reasons for being busy, but I did feel like I wasn't a priority to her. It just made me work harder for the relationship. This is so typical. Like, I just had 2 calls today with people who had the same type of experience. And then when you start to confront them, or you start to open the conversation and you express how you feel, they dismiss you. It's like the typical avoidant, it's like the avoidant like conflict pattern. It's like the same thing. It's like dismiss, minimize, refuse, and it's one of those things that will continue to repeat. I'm proud of you though for at this point kind of like starting to see through all of this. It's like you said, you believed her, like her reasons, like busy with work, the kid, the appointments. And you're understanding though that you're not a priority, and that's probably what kept you locked in, because you were like, well, I may not be a priority because she has all these appointments, so I'll work even harder. And to a certain extent, I can understand where that makes sense. But everything you're sharing at this point, I'm just glad that you got kind of like the nerve, or you got to the point where you wanted to question her. Um, I was so confused what was going on. It is so confusing, and you fought for the closeness that you thought the relationship needed. So many of us do. So many of us do. And I think we all feel that. It's not that, like, just like with the call I had earlier today, like, it's one of those things where it's like, it's not that they don't care. You know they care. It's that you're, like, one of the clients mentioned, they were an afterthought. It seems to be an afterthought. And you're mentioning not a priority. And when I had that situation with my ex, one of my exes, I felt the same way. I wasn't a priority. I believed everything he was saying, and I understood what the importance of it. But it was like, okay, like, there's importance versus urgent, and there's so many layers to it. But at the end of the day, you should be a priority. And again, I'm glad you're asking these questions. um, Despite her repeated assurances that she loved me, I felt her pulling away, creating more distance, and she started communicating a need to spend more time alone. And if you're anxious, I can only imagine, like what you mentioned quite a few times in here, you were anxious. And who knows, maybe you started off as secure, because I was secure, and dealing with an avoidant, trust me when I say, you can easily bring out it can bring out tons of anxiety. I don't know if it really shifted me all the way to like an anxious attachment, but I can tell you that I definitely had those anxious moments. I was like, I can relate to so many of these stories, because I mean, it gives you so much anxiety because you just can't make sense of any of it. Um, so I feel you on this. Um, all right, so sorry about that. Despite her repeated assurances that she loved me, I felt her pulling away, creating more distance, and she started communicating a need to spend more time alone. She was meeting with friends and doing hobbies in the little time we otherwise had together. She still didn't let me near her kid after knowing me for 7 years. Now, despite her saying how I'm a great dad, I was hurt and got mad, respectfully called her out on it, and she became furious with me. She threw a litany of complaints on me, stretching back years that I've never heard before. She said I stifled her friendships and hobbies, and she felt suffocated. She said she sacrificed everything for me, despite me surviving on crumbs of affection. It was our first real fight. 1 week later, she broke up with me, saying she lost feelings for me and hadn't realized why or when. I was truly devastated and hadn't seen it coming. I had waited and self abandoned for years, worked hard to get the version of her back who made time for me and wanted real intimacy. I'm going to stop here for a second because this just strikes so real. I mean, there are so many times that you can question, like you said, like she didn't even let you close to her kid or even meet her kid, near her kid, after knowing you for 7 years. Like, and she said how great of a dad what you are. Like, it just, of course you'd be hurt, Kurt. Of course you would be mad. I love that you respectfully called her out. But like the typical avoidant, they become furious. And it's so interesting. I love that you pointed out, and then she's like threw a litany of complaints on me, stretching back years that I've never heard before. That's so typical. Like, if you've been in a relationship with an avoidant for a very long time, that happened so many times when I would address things. Then all of a sudden it was like a tit for tat. Like, it was like, oh, you're mentioning this, and I was just expressing emotions, and then all of a sudden they like opened a bag of all these complaints and things they had been just like probably suppressing this whole time, which they could have just addressed. So it's no surprise that at this moment and this crisis, when you're confronting her, when you are actually bringing it to her attention and she gets furious, and then now she's kind of in her own little battle mode, it's not a surprise that this is when she's like, oh, I'm done. Like, she's done because you've confronted her. She's not going, most avoidants are not going to come face to face with what they need to address. So this is the perfect opportunity for her to check out and say, yeah, we're done. She's lost feelings. And if she says she's lost feelings, it's kind of like, you could give a lot of reasons as to why you're breaking up with somebody. But when you tell someone you've lost feelings, that's pretty clear cut. Like, they're not wanting to be in it because they're not in it with me anymore. It's not like, well, our lifestyles are incompatible, or, you live here and I live here, and things that we could probably possibly discuss, or one of us can make a different decision upon. When someone loses feelings, there's nowhere to go from there, right? So it's just interesting that she lost feelings and she hadn't realized why or when. I'm like, probably the minute you confronted her and she was going to have to be faced with the truth. Um, Anyways, it is truly devastating. You said I hadn't seen it coming. It's so interesting because reflecting back, a lot of us feel blindsided, right? We never saw it coming. But then once you get out of this and you've been on the other side for quite some time, because even on your letter, I can see it coming. And it's not just that my experience with love coaching, it's not just my experience with, the avoidant. There are moments in here that are red flags. There aren't for any relationship. And so when you were like, I hadn't seen it coming, when I reflect back on my relationship, I didn't want to see it coming. You know what I mean? But it was coming, So I think a lot of us will see that once we get on the other side, when we have been able to take a step back, because it's like written on the wall sometimes. And we just have our blinders on. We just want this to work so bad. And here's the thing. Like 90% of the relationship, 90% of this person is amazing. It's like the 10%, which is not being able to deal with the conflict, the avoidance, their whole, the whole avoidant attachment style. So that's, and even though it's a 10% thing, it's key to have a healthy relationship. So I get how difficult it is to walk away, or, to even, you know, in the midst of this or in the middle of the storm, think that you had an idea that this was coming. Um, and for those of you who may be in the thick of the storm now, when whether they're an avoidant or not, when you're in a relationship and someone starts to pull away and it continues, even if it's pull away, come back, pull away, come back. The point is if you're in a relationship where it continues to fade, like remember when you said, on one of these pages you said, I felt something was off, and I said that's kind of when the downward spiral happens. When you notice that something is off, that's when the downward spiral happens, often with these avoidant attachment style partners. That's when you really need to make sure you're paying attention. And so much of it is we can't pay attention. We're already in the thick of it, On the outside, I could say this to a lot of you. Maybe you're still dealing with it or still in the midst of it, of the relationship, and it's not over yet. But if any relationship is starting to fade and the intimacy is starting to decline, and they're not recognizing it, acknowledging it, or identifying that as well, or bringing it to you, and you guys aren't meeting in the middle to talk about it, that's a sign that this isn't going in the right direction or the direction you're hoping. So that would be for any relationship moving forward. All right, back to this. I simply Googled the breakup reason and found attachment theory 3 days later. I read attached, and things that happened made so much more sense. She doesn't recognize herself in avoidant attachment, and she anyway doesn't believe in therapy. She currently thinks she's better off staying single for the coming years. I probably need some therapy. She currently thinks she's better off staying single for the coming years. I probably need some therapy to move on. She was amazing for years, but the last year of our relationship was a bizarre experience that I don't wish on anyone. All right. First of all, thank you so much for sharing this because these letters truly do help. There's so much relatability. There's so much for others to gain from letters like this. So proud of you for taking time to reach out, to share your experience. My heart goes out to you. Like this wasn't just, and it doesn't really matter the time frame really. It doesn't matter if it's 7 months or 7 years, but it was 7 years. I mean, you met her 7 years ago. You've known each other for 7 years, no matter how long you were actually together. Um, you know, I have to be honest. After an experience with an avoidant myself and dealing with so many clients that have these avoidant experiences, we do need something coaching, therapy, support. We need to have somebody that we can, honestly, that can understand where we're coming from, who can identify the kind of situation we've been through, that has experience, that may know how to navigate this, that can support, you know, emotionally detoxing from this type of experience. It's fucking deep. It hurts. And it is blindsiding and it is like mind boggling and it is hard to connect the dots. But I can assure you that you can get through this and you can get through it faster when you have someone that can support you in it. So I always encourage all of you to, explore those resources and options to help you because I know one thing when it came to mine, and I'm a love coach at the time of this whole situation that I went through. Um, I needed to talk to somebody. Unfortunately, I wasn't so tapped into the avoidant resources quite yet because this happened, right when this was all coming about and people were really starting to pay attention to attachment styles and so forth. But I needed to talk and I needed to share and I needed to like keep getting it out my system. I didn't want to suppress it. I don't want to become avoidant because, not that I'd become avoidant because of this experience, but I didn't want to avoid the pain or what I've been through. So I think it's really important to, when you're going like post breakup, to, understand attachment styles. That's why I love this Ken Reed's series. I love that Ken Reed provides resources and a team that can help you. But understanding attachment styles post breakup so that you can not blame yourself, so you can stop having that self blame and that guilt and replaying those moments where you feel like it was your fault and maybe you could have did it different and we could have all showed up different. We're not perfect, but I understand that. But it wouldn't have given us a different outcome if you're truly dealing with an avoidance. So it's really important. So if you are post breakup, to understand the attachment styles. If you don't know, a lot about it, dive in a little bit deeper because this will help take self blame to clarity, confusion to clarity, and that's and that helps with this process. So again, appreciate you writing this letter. Hope I shared. By the end of this, let me share some thoughts. The questions that might have been asked, and one of the questions that was asked. I do believe she was an avoidant. I do believe, and it sounds like a dismissive avoidant. I could be wrong, but I do believe probably a dismissive avoidant, but an avoidant at that. And I would think that based off what you've also shared, it sounded like you might have had an anxious attachment style as well. So that was that. You asked that question. I'm pretty confident after reading the whole letter that that's where we're at. Um, Again, thanks for sharing. I think that's about it. I think I tapped into everything I could and pulled out from there. Um, yeah. Thank you so much, and I hope to see all of you back here on Ken Reads again.